you have to fix yourself before you fix the world. Otherwise, you become part of the problem.
Welcome to another episode of Tea with Tea. It's going to be a special one because this is going to be episode 100.
Nice.
I saved this one just for you. So I'm here joined with Nishant on a very important topic. But before we get into it, Nishant, why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Sure, thank you, Thi. And it's May, it's Mental Health Awareness Month. My name is Nishant. I'm actually the Experience Curator at the SAP Experience Centre Singapore. But I'm here to share something very personal with me, and thank you very much for giving me the space today.
Absolutely welcomed. And let's get into the space. Mental health. If you open social media, quite a lot of talk about it, but I want to learn a little bit more about how is the topic of mental health awareness important to you personally?
So I would say it's important to me in a very central way, because I've actually been diagnosed with clinical depression and also complex PTSD. I've been living with both of these for as long as I can remember, so they've really shaped me in a very fundamental way. I can also throw some statistics at you. Suicide is the 4th leading cause of death among people aged 15 to 29. Now that's my age group. It's also the leading cause of disability in the world. And I think it was a 2018 study where it was found that about 1 out of 7 Singaporeans here in this country have or will face a mental health condition in their lifetime.
Wow, that's actually, to be honest, quite surprising. I didn't know about these.
And
these
despite the prevalence of this issue, I think we as a society are quite bad at recognizing it and supporting the individuals who actually have it.
If I may ask, how did you find out about yourself that there might be something around the mental health issue?
So for me, it was the situation of there was nothing wrong with my life. I had a job, I had a really stable relationship, I had a very good social circle, but still I was crying 4 or 5 times a day. Sometimes I couldn't even stop crying during the day long enough to actually get something done. I was also experiencing a lot of paranoia. I was scared to go to sleep because I thought there was something under my bed, or I thought there were ghosts around me for some reason. And so these things were plaguing my life. And I remember having a conversation with one of my best friends, and I know she has depression and anxiety and she is taking medication for it, and I asked her, did it feel like this? And she said yes, and that was when I knew. So then I related this information to my primary therapist, who I see every week or so, and she then referred me to a specialized psychologist who gave me the diagnosis, and this was later confirmed by a psychiatrist who then followed up with medication.
How did you approach this? Like when you say, you came from this kind of stigma in this society and culture, how did you approach then the communication with your friends, your family around this topic?
I was upfront, because when you're treating it like a secret, it just feels like a burden that you're carrying with you everywhere. But people who love you can be more understanding than you give them credit for. So I'm very lucky to have a circle of friends and also colleagues who've held my hand through this process. And just been there for me. And they didn't need to understand it to be there for me, which was the best part.
Right. I mean, you mentioned already some of the symptoms which you had, but you probably also are much more, let's say, well-versed than other people who have not been into this topic of
We'll see
awareness.
about that.
But maybe can you also share some other, let's say, triggers or tells related that it could be a mental health issue?
So a mental health condition or a mental illness can only be diagnosed by a licensed professional. It's also the case where not every counselor or therapist or psychologist is able to diagnose it. So if you are seeing a trusted person and they're not able to diagnose it, they will probably refer you to someone else. I've already mentioned in my case how it was done. I say this because it's very important not to self-diagnose or diagnose other people, because a false diagnosis might actually set up the person for a very devastating situation. I think what I would like people to understand about the symptoms of mental health is, we know depression, we know anxiety, these are the very common ones, but mental illness goes beyond those two. We're talking about things like eating disorders and psychotic disorders and even personality disorders, and also stress-related illnesses like PTSD, and there's a whole spectrum of symptoms for each one of these. So we need to broaden our definition of what mental illness looks like. I think for the everyday person who may not be a medical professional, some things you could look out for are, is the person experiencing extreme weight gain or extreme weight loss? Because this could be a sign of an eating disorder. Are they seemingly out of touch with reality or thinking that things are happening when they're not actually happening? That could be another sign as well. And also, it could be extreme displays of emotion, but also a complete lack of emotion. That's another sign. And also addiction. I think, if I may say, I think we live in a society that almost glorifies alcohol addiction and this idea that you're a functional alcoholic, when actually we're trying to push ourselves beyond the point of what we can actually handle and not setting very clear boundaries. Of course, things like alcohol abuse, substance abuse. This I've heard before, someone just mentioning to me that he has to take something to sleep every night. That is a red flag, and that is not something you should ignore as well. So it's a huge variety of symptoms, and very impossible to explain all of this in one video, but I really recommend that people look to the entities in their specific region who can provide more information on this topic. So in Singapore, it's places like the Singapore Association for Mental Health and the Institute of Mental Health.
Thanks a lot, and I will make sure to also include all these references then when we publish the videos shortly. So now you have mentioned that we have now a Mental Health Awareness Month, which I think is a really a great thing. Let me actually go a little bit to the edges of the way how we communicate things. You also mentioned, the over-glorification of, for example, like alcoholism, the same thing, like, I guess, about workaholics as well, right? So now the topic of mental health is then, quotes and quotes, don't take me literally, competing with so many other topics that sometimes it gets just pushed away because we have economic worries, we have geopolitical worries, the future is still very volatile. How can we make sure that this topic just does not get pushed to the corner and having some, let's say, temporary spikes from time to time?
I think you asked a really good question, P. And actually, I remember us discussing what are the topics we should include in the video. And I was drawn to this one because it's a really hard question. But the fact is that mental health is so deeply intertwined with some of the issues that you've mentioned, with climate change, with economic disruptions. I think it was last year that either the UN or the WHO, they put out a study detailing the tangible risks that climate change has on mental health. So that's just to illustrate how we shouldn't push aside mental health for the sake of these issues, because the situation will only get worse from there. Now, when it actually comes to engaging with these issues, I think you gotta strike a balance there. And I use myself as an example. So I consider myself a huge advocate for many things, right? And when I'm engaging with my advocacy, I make it a point to really think about the purpose of why I'm doing so. Why am I engaging in this discussion? Why am I attending this event? Why am I liking this social media post or reading this article? Is it because I genuinely want to learn and make a difference? Or is it because I just want to project my anger and my anxieties onto something, right? And if it's the latter, it's probably going to be quite unproductive as well as destructive for your mental well-being in that situation. So one is coming from a place of purpose and passion, and the other one is coming from a place of pain. And I always tell myself when I start going into this whole, you have to fix yourself before you fix the world. Otherwise, you become part of the problem.
Thanks very much. I only have one last question for today. And again, thanks for sharing these very intimate and very personal insights about this very important topic. So my last question is, how can I support the cause?
I think doing exactly what you are doing now. I think listening to the stories of people who live with mental illness, educating yourself on things to look out for, and I think empathy is also very important. As you know, I didn't know what a mental illness felt like until I had one. And I remember feeling really guilty because I didn't understand what my friends with mental illness were going through until I had it. But that's just the fact of the matter. And I think all you can do is listen and empathize and educate.
Well, with that, thanks so much, Nishant.
Thank you, Thee.
Until the next time.